Now let's talk about some of the policies that were mentioned in the RNC, because the DNC was pretty, lack policy a lot. Like as we mentioned before, like I think the only part that actually really started delving into like policy substance was when Joe Biden was talking about his plan for COVID recovery. If it was still as big of a problem once he gets into office as it is now, and I think there's still a good chance that that will be the case. Um, but like the RNC did spend a lot more time talking about policy than the DNC did, but with the exception of the First Step Act, it was all the wrong policies. And
Yes,
like,
definitely. I
and
mean,
yeah,
stuff like the First Step Act. Sure, it helps to reduce. It basically the bill increases good like good behavior credits, but the thing is
yeah,
the downside with it. A lot of it, like say if you have past criminal records, it can affect your ability to get out. And say if even if you have a violent felony and you have served a long time in prison, which most likely means that you're less likely to be reoffend, you could still be denied early release.
yeah. Well,
And a
that's the thing.
problem,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, no,
Go
like
ahead.
so, and a problem thing is with Bill, it's a good start, but the thing is, it only taxes the federal level. People like to make it think like mass incarceration is nationally. Like, no, this is at your local and state level. This is happening every day because the decisions at those levels, which were encouraged by federal policy at first, have made it where there have been many people that have been locked up in prisons when there's a significant portion that could have gone through rehabilitation programs, community service that should not be in prison.
Yeah, I mean, like the First Step Act is literally a first step. It doesn't go nearly far enough, but it does do a good job at working to reduce uh, reduce sentences and let people out early that don't deserve to be in prison for you know these 40 to 50-year sentences.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is the one policy they mentioned that actually has done some good. But other things that were very prevalent at the RNC was the tax bill, school choice, and Donald Trump's commitment to being the most pro-life president in history. And so, like, let's first talk about the tax bill. Well, like, before we do that, like, I wanted to point this out. Like, there was this. I think it was in the second night. I don't think. Yeah, you weren't with us on the second night,
No,
Malcolm,
I
were you?
had to work that night.
Yeah. So like, they yeah, were like it was like a filmed segment with Mike Pence, and he was talking to numerous different families, talk about like how these policies had like who these policies had helped. Uh, but like and I don't doubt for a second that some of these policies have helped some people, but they weren't referring to any like polling numbers or any broad picture of what the policy had done. They were really cherry picking, individual instances of um, like of when this policy had worked for the better, right?
Yeah, like the thing is, like there was an independent review on like an accountant did this. They calculated how much it would save for Americans based off class. And while it did help, yes, it did help lower middle class and middle class people. It mostly helped billionaires
Yeah,
and
and
people
yeah, like the
that
tax
made
cut. Yeah,
over like $500,000 a year annually.
yeah. So like in that, yeah, that gets into the tax bill. What was it, like 80% of the benefits went to the top 1%, something like that? I think that was.
Well, something like that, but it was more disproportionately to benefit those people in that income category.
Well, yeah, that's what I was talking about. And like, thing is, like,
I just don't want
there,
to say it because I don't want to like. come back and say, "Oh, that's not true," because I don't really know the exact number.
But yeah, and the other this tax cut did help a few people, but like the tax cuts that middle class earners did experience with this bill are temporary,
Yeah,
whereas the tax cut for the tax cuts for the top 1% are permanent with this bill. And this is something that Joe Biden demonstrated at the RNC or at the DNC that he is better with, because he wants to raise the effective tax rate on billionaires from like 21% to 28%, which
yeah.
doesn't go nearly
And
far
most
enough,
notably,
but I
I
think
like
that's a
how
good step.
and I like how he likes to attack capital gains tax as well.
Yeah, because basically capital gains is just like a capital gains tax cut is basically rewarding rich people who gamble on the stock market for basically not doing any work, whereas like the actual work is taxed more. So it's that's the problem with the tax bill. And one of the things that fascinated me the most, was they kept on talking about school choice. Essentially,
Yes,
what that allows families to do is it allows families to take their children out of bad schools that are closer to them, and then put them in nicer schools, whether they be private or public, somewhere else.
yeah, and Don Jr., his son, Trump's son, was a lot of talking about that and saying,
Yeah.
"quote He had the opportunity, but many Black and Hispanic kids are stuck in bad schools across the country, which is why school choice is needed."
Yeah.
The thing is, with his argument, it's like, how does that solve racial disparities in school funding, and even racial disparities in appraising values among properties,
Yeah,
which
that's the
70% of tax revenue from those tax 70% of tax revenue from those properties go to schools.
Yeah.
Far majority, and that determines if your school can be well funded or not so well funded. And the thing is with this, because there are even people who suggest even charter schools, even board schools as alternatives. Thing is, your tax dollars are supposed to work for you. That's why you pay money to your state, because the state is responsible for schools.
Yeah, and that gets to the
Now,
heart of the problem. It's like,
yeah.
yeah,
So
like,
now, if your state is obviously failing to help these lower funded districts or make sure that these schools get fair funding equally across the board, no matter if they're rich or poor, and more so provide equity, which is appropriating the resources needed based on your situation to these schools so they can get up to par to schools in wealthier areas, it really shows the problem that your state is not doing that.
yeah,
If you feel that you need to have a voucher, or you feel that you need to go to a prep school, a board school, or charter school.
yeah, and that's the problem with school choice. Like, it may seem like a good idea on the surface, but the devil's in the details. I mean, obviously, like, you just hear the idea like, oh, like kids can decide to move away from a shitty school district, or like not move away from a shitty school district, but go to school in the next district, which is better, to
Yeah,
receive a better education. That alone may seem like a good idea, but when you're funding like charter schools, and like the idea that the school choice, and now the government is, and also the government gives funding to private schools now, not only is that just approaching the problem itself, like of inadequate school, you know inadequate education standards, like it doesn't address that issue from the right standpoint, which what we really need to do is just fund, like give more funding to the poorer schools so they can be better, but also
yeah,
funding charter schools and private schools and things like that, actively like divert funds from that can be going to those poorer schools. So
Yeah, especially religious private schools. That will
Yeah,
mostly fund
which because
disproportionately white middle class families.
yeah, and because of a recent Supreme Court decision, uh, you know, John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion that if we're going to give funding to private schools, we can't just exclude religious schools because that wouldn't be fair. How about don't give money to private schools? I mean,
Yeah,
the people who can afford to go to private schools are rich enough to keep those institutions up and running.
yeah, I do agree that we should not have. I mean, the thing is, there is a argument on the left that religious schools shouldn't be funded, but charter schools, boarding schools, they should be funded. And
Yeah,
it's basically as if, if you're non secular, that's a problem. We could give you funding. But if you're religious, we don't want to do that. But the thing is, if we're going to do that, let's just, how about fix the public school system, make that better, so
yeah,
private school systems can actually compete with the public school system.
that's one of my bigger disagreements with like Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang has supported support for charter schools in the past, and like again, like that just diverts funds that could be going to like public schools that actually need the funding.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not against the concept of vouchers or charter schools. Those work fine in individual instances, but Republicans are trying to
But they're
create
not
a
they're
they're
not
not
just some godly idea.
yeah, they're trying to create a individual approach to a systemic problem.
Yeah, and like then again, like by focusing on things like that, they're making the problem at hand much worse rather than actually solving it.
Yeah, it's like one person coming out of a poor environment and becoming rich does not benefit the majority of poor people.
Right. And now, like the last policy we're going to talk about that was mentioned in the RNC was uh, Donald Trump's commitment to being the most pro-life president in American history. So, I mean, like right away, it's just like that. As important as the issue of abortion is, it really holds no like holds at least thinking about abortion from this framework really has no relevance to today's biggest problems because we have you know we have COVID, and then we also have the economic crisis that was caused by COVID, as well as the social unrest caused by police brutality, as well as the climate crisis, among other things. So like abortion just seems like that abortion in the abortion arguments in this framework just more or less just seem like petty culture war stuff. So like I don't know why they decided to like focus so much time on it. And
Yeah,
also,
definitely.
yeah,
The
not to
thing is,
mention the hypocrisy of the so-called pro-lifer position
yeah,
holders.
a lot of it. Say if they want to if they want to actually care about life, the thing is, they would be more proponents of helping of social programs to actually help people get out of poverty. But they're not for that. The thing they did with opportunity zones under Tim Scott just basically allowed gentrifiers to come into the neighborhood,
Yeah,
create businesses, which will obviously push out the lower class people and more so attract middle class people.
yeah, and that goes back to
Then
what we were talking
actually
about with
help.
school choice. There is a problem. Abortion, like the issue of abortion is a problem that needs to be addressed, but they approach it from the exact wrong position.
Yeah,
Like you
they more
don't,
so
yeah,
apply
just
individual
outright
perspective.
banning abortion uh, doesn't do anything to actually stop abortion. Similar to like how prohibition just gave birth to the moonshine trade, and then eventually like because of the moonshine trade that gave us NASCAR, which is something I learned from reading the Liberal Redneck Manifesto by the well-read comedy trio, which I'd recommend. It's a good book. But but yeah, like that. My point is, like, I digress from that. My point is, just outright banning something doesn't do really anything to like actually reduce, reduce that thing. You know, weed is banned. People still smoke weed.
Yeah,
You know,
it's necessarily
prohibition
why
didn't do
people.
anything to actually stop people from using alcohol. And then like before Roe v. Wade, women still had abortions. They just had them in less safe and less controlled conditions.
Yeah, it's more so why people need to feel to have drugs, why people necessarily get
Yeah,
abortions if they are for economic reasons, which
yeah,
I feel the Republican Party needs to address before we actually say even put in abortion bans.
yeah. That's the exact right way to approach this issue. You do have to approach it from the issue of like why is it that this is happening rather than saying this is happening, it's bad, let's ban it. You know, and but it seems that the Republicans are not willing to have that conversation about why women are having abortions. And and another thing, they tried to make it seem like Planned Parenthood is on some like eugenics fueled uh, genocide mission. Uh, you know, because most the people who get abortions the most are people of color. But that's not because like Planned Parenthood is racist or anything. It's because it because black and brown people face those conditions of poverty that do lead them to have abortions because they can't afford to have a baby, right?
Well, yeah, necessarily. I mean, the thing is, a lot of the things that lead people to have these are economic issues,
Yeah,
and they can be terminal. They could be terminal or maybe personal choice, which I would understand why they would have more so bans on abortion on that. But I do think if we just to target the economic issues, we can alleviate a lot of families' pains in family planning.
yeah, because that addresses the fertility rate in this country in general because
I mean,
millennials are not having children nearly at the same rate that the baby boomers were.
no, because a lot of people feel rent strapped.
Yeah,
Feel
like
like they cannot provide a good lifestyle for children they want to have.
yeah, and they don't want to have the baby. Like people like have said, like, well, if they can't afford to have the baby, why not put it up for adoption? Do you really want to put them through that too?
Yeah, and another thing is, if we're gonna do that, we also need to fix the horrible foster care system we
Yeah,
have.
that's another issue in itself.
So I mean, if I would more so actually respect Republicans on the idea if they were actually dedicated to repairing the foster care system.
Yeah, and on top of that, like that, I'm talking about like the hypocrisy of the whole pro-life position. Like a lot of these conservatives are pro-death penalty.
Yeah, and they're just anti pro life when it comes to many social issues.
Yeah, like it's just like what was it like? It was George Carlin that said, "If you're pre-born, you're fine. If you're preschool, you're fucked." Pretty much just sums it up.